What if I told you that the most popular advice in self-help culture is actually destroying your mind? What if loving yourself isn't healing you, but slowly poisoning your ability to grow? What if everything you've been taught about self-acceptance is keeping you trapped in a prison of your own making? Today, we're going to explore a disturbing possibility that might change how you see yourself forever. A truth so uncomfortable that most people will reject it immediately. But if you're brave enough to stay with me, you might discover why the most successful transformations happen when people stop loving who they are. For decades, we've been told the same story. Love yourself. Accept yourself. Embrace who you are. It sounds beautiful, doesn't it? It feels warm and nurturing, like a mother's embrace. But what if this message isn't just wrong? What if it's designed to keep you exactly where you are? Think about it carefully. How many people do you know who've been loving themselves for years, but somehow remain stuck in the same patterns, the same problems, the same limitations? They post about self-love on social media, they repeat affirmations, they practice radical acceptance, yet nothing fundamentally changes. They're like hamsters running on a wheel painted with rainbow colors, thinking they're making progress because the scenery looks pleasant. But they're still in the same cage. They're still running in circles. And the worst part? They've convinced themselves this is enlightenment. The truth is, these people have become addicted to the comfort of self-acceptance. They've made a religion out of staying exactly the same. They've confused stagnation with peace and mediocrity with spiritual awakening. Here's what nobody wants to admit. The version of yourself you're loving might be the exact version that needs to die. When we fall in love with who we are, we become invested in staying exactly that way. We become defenders of our own limitations. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. Every species that stopped adapting, that became too comfortable with its current form, eventually went extinct. Yet somehow we've convinced ourselves that personal stagnation is a virtue. Self-love often becomes a sophisticated form of self-sabotage. It's the ego's favorite defense mechanism, disguised as wisdom. It whispers, "You're perfect just as you are," while your potential withers in the darkness, unexplored and unlived. Every time you choose comfort over growth, every time you choose self-acceptance over self-challenge, you're essentially conducting a funeral for the person you could have become. And the cruelest part is that you're doing it with love. You're lovingly murdering your own possibilities. You're tenderly suffocating your dreams. You're gently strangling your potential, all while telling yourself you're being kind to yourself. When we love ourselves unconditionally, we remove the very tension that drives transformation. We become like a comfortable prisoner who stops looking for the key because the cell feels like home. We mistake stagnation for peace and mediocrity for enlightenment. But here's the psychological trap that nobody talks about. Comfort is the enemy of growth. Safety is the assassin of potential. When you make yourself too comfortable, you stop evolving. You become a living fossil of who you used to be. Self-love culture teaches us to silence that inner voice that says, "You could be more." It labels dissatisfaction as toxic, ambition as selfish, and the desire for growth as a sign of not loving yourself enough. It's a psychological prison disguised as a spa retreat. True growth requires a certain level of dissatisfaction with who you are. It requires the courage to admit that the person you are today isn't the person you could become tomorrow. It requires the willingness to feel uncomfortable with your current limitations. But modern self-help has turned discomfort into the enemy. It's taught us that any negative feeling about ourselves is unhealthy. This is like telling an athlete that muscle soreness is bad, or telling a student that mental effort is toxic. But here's the twist that will really mess with your mind. Maybe the goal isn't to love yourself or hate yourself. Maybe the goal is to become curious about yourself. Curiosity doesn't require acceptance. It requires investigation. It requires the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. Curiosity is the antidote to stagnation. When you're curious, you're not defending who you are, you're exploring who you could become. You're not protecting your current identity, you're investigating your potential. When you're curious, you ask different questions. Instead of, "How can I accept this?" You ask, "Why do I do this? What would happen if I changed this? Who might I become if I pushed past this limitation? What am I afraid to discover about my own potential?" Curiosity treats your life like a fascinating experiment rather than a fixed reality. It approaches your personality like a hypothesis to be tested rather than a truth to be defended. Curiosity creates possibilities where acceptance creates finality. Love says you're enough, but curiosity says, Let's see what else is possible. Love protects you from discomfort, but curiosity leads you into the unknown where all transformation happens. The most successful people in history weren't the ones who loved themselves the most. They were the ones who remained most curious about what they were capable of. The people who transform the most aren't the ones who love themselves unconditionally. They're the ones who love themselves enough to demand better from themselves. There's a crucial difference between self-compassion and self-indulgence, between acceptance and resignation. Think about the people you most admire. Were they comfortable with who they were? Did they accept their limitations? Or were they constantly pushing themselves to become more than they thought possible? Self-love without standards becomes self-stagnation. It becomes an excuse to never push your boundaries, never question your assumptions, never evolve beyond your current limitations. It's like being a loving parent who never challenges their child to grow up. Real self-love looks more like tough love. It means caring about yourself too much to let yourself stay small. It means being willing to have difficult conversations with yourself. It means refusing to settle for the comfortable mediocrity of unconditional self-acceptance. When you truly care about someone, you don't just accept their worst behaviors. You challenge them to be better. You hold them accountable. You believe in their potential to grow. So why would you treat yourself with less care? So what's the alternative? Instead of loving who you are, what if you fell in love with who you're becoming? What if you developed a passionate relationship with your own potential? What if your primary love affair was with the process of your own evolution? This is a completely different way of relating to yourself. Instead of defending who you are, you become fascinated by who you could become. Instead of protecting your current identity, you become excited about transcending it. This means accepting that growth is uncomfortable. It means being willing to outgrow your current identity regularly. It means treating yourself like a work of art that's never quite finished, always capable of another brushstroke, another layer of depth. When you fall in love with becoming, you stop clinging to who you are and start getting excited about who you might be. You stop defending your current limitations and start seeing them as launching pads for transformation. You begin to see yourself not as a finished product to be preserved, but as an ongoing project to be developed, not as a fixed entity to be loved, but as a dynamic process to be engaged with. Here's what mature self-development actually looks like. You care about yourself too much to let yourself stay the same. You refuse to settle for the comfortable mediocrity of unconditional self-acceptance. You treat yourself like someone worthy of continuous improvement. This isn't about self-hatred or constant criticism. This is about having enough respect for your own potential that you refuse to waste it. It's about loving your future self enough to make sacrifices for them today. The most successful people aren't the ones who learn to love their flaws unconditionally. They're the ones who learn to love the process of overcoming them. They developed a relationship with discomfort. They made friends with the parts of themselves that needed work. They don't pretend their shadow doesn't exist. They don't spiritual bypass their problems with positive affirmations. They look directly at their dysfunction, their patterns, their limitations, and they say, "How interesting. Let's see what we can do about this." They treat their flaws like puzzles to be solved rather than features to be celebrated. They approach their limitations with scientific curiosity rather than unconditional acceptance. Maybe the biggest lie isn't that you should love yourself. Maybe the biggest lie is that there's a fixed self to love in the first place. What if you're not a noun but a verb? Not a thing but a process? Not a final product but an ongoing experiment in human potential? This changes everything. If you're a process rather than a product, then the goal isn't to arrive somewhere and stay there. The goal is to keep moving, keep evolving, keep becoming something more than you were yesterday. What if the healthiest relationship you can have with yourself is one of respectful collaboration with your own evolution? What if instead of saying, "I love who I am," you said, "I'm fascinated by who I'm becoming"? This perspective liberates you from the prison of fixed identity. You're not stuck being who you've always been. You're not condemned to repeat your past patterns forever. You're a work in progress, and the work is never done. Every day you get to choose who you become. Every moment you get to decide whether you'll grow or stagnate. Every choice is a vote for the person you're becoming. So how do you love yourself without becoming complacent? How do you have self-compassion without losing your edge? The answer is standards-based self-relationship. You love yourself enough to have high expectations for yourself. This means you enter into a conscious partnership with your future self. You make agreements about who you're becoming. You set standards that honor your potential, rather than just accepting your current reality. You treat personal growth like an athlete treats training. not because you hate who you are, but because you're so curious about what you're capable of that you're willing to do the work to find out. Athletes don't hate their bodies when they push them to their limits. They love their bodies enough to demand excellence from them. They understand that comfort is the enemy of performance, and that growth happens in the space between what you are and what you could become. Real transformation happens when you stop trying to love away your problems and start getting curious about them. Your darkness isn't something to eliminate through positive thinking. It's raw material for your evolution. Your flaws, your patterns, your dysfunctions, these aren't bugs in your system. They're features that haven't been properly understood yet. They contain information about what needs to be healed, what needs to be integrated, what needs to be transformed. When you approach your shadow with curiosity instead of judgment, magic happens. Your weaknesses become your greatest sources of strength. Your wounds become your wisdom. Your failures become your foundation for success. The parts of yourself you're trying to love away are often the parts that contain your greatest potential. Your anger might contain your passion. Your sensitivity might contain your empathy. Your restlessness might contain your ambition. Instead of accepting these parts unconditionally, what if you got curious about what they're trying to tell you? What if you treated them as messengers rather than mistakes? So here's the paradox that will reframe everything. The deepest act of self-love isn't accepting who you are. It's refusing to let who you are be all that you ever become. It's loving yourself enough to outgrow yourself repeatedly. True self-love says, I care about you too much to let you waste your potential. I believe in you too much to let you stay comfortable. I see who you could become, and I refuse to let you settle for less. This is love that liberates rather than limits. Love that challenges rather than coddles. Love that sees potential and refuses to let it go unrealized. Love that says, become instead of accept. This kind of love doesn't protect you from discomfort. It protects you from mediocrity. It doesn't shield you from challenge. It shields you from stagnation. It doesn't keep you safe from failure. It keeps you safe from never trying. So here's my challenge to you, and it's not comfortable. For the next week, instead of trying to love who you are, try getting curious about who you might become. Ask yourself harder questions. Set higher standards. Demand more from your own potential. Stop protecting yourself from discomfort and start protecting yourself from mediocrity. Stop accepting your limitations as permanent and start seeing them as temporary. Stop loving who you are and start becoming who you could be. Start each day by asking, who am I becoming today? End each day by asking, did I grow or did I stagnate? Treat your personal development like the most important job you've ever had. Because maybe the real act of self-love isn't accepting everything about yourself. Maybe it's caring about yourself enough to never stop growing. Maybe it's refusing to let the person you are today be the final word on who you can become. Maybe the greatest love you can show yourself is the love that demands more. The love that sees potential and refuses to let it die. The love that says, I believe in who you could become more than I accept who you are right now. What do you think? Is your mind hiding the truth about growth from you? Are you ready to love yourself enough to outgrow yourself?